That's $1 million question. And I can't emphasize that anymore because most people, they think there are select individuals that can do it and they cannot. And that's what needs to be shattered as an illusion. And that's part of what I feel has been creating the split in this world. That the way civilization has been set up is to separate people from their innate power and the power of their consciousness. Because if all would simultaneously wake up to the power of their awareness, their free will, their ability to change what they feel can't be changed, it would be the disruptive kind of nuclear bomb to set the collective free. Everyone would choose differently that isn't experiencing the bliss state of freedom and love and unity. And so at the same time, a lot of people aren't choosing that because they're afraid to, or they think that they aren't ready. So if we were to red pill ourselves into creating that opportunity, it comes down to that, to realizing that that's why you're here. And if you're suffering, you're literally just depriving yourself of the opportunity that you signed up for and created for yourself.
What are you asking yourself right now the most about the nature of this universe, why we're here, what it means to be a human? What are those big questions that are on your mind right now?
You know, and it's interesting. My entire life, I feel like I've been driven and guided by one essential question, which is always just why. It's like the spiraling mechanism through the question why that brings you deeper into the source of why the question arose. And also it gets answered by going into the singularity of that particular question. So every time I feel something, I'm always compelled to ask, why is this feeling present? And that immediately leads to the nexus point of where integration is found. And so I'm always asking, why these tendencies externally and internally simultaneously? When I work with somebody, it's all about why is this experience coming up? Why is there fragmentation in the field? Why is somebody feeling split, or why are they symptomatically experiencing whatever it is that they are? And why always leads you to understand the many layers of the simulation, because from the why, the how, the what, the where, everything else is found. And it's compiled based on that deep yearning to understand really the reason or the meaning behind what is. And so I find myself constantly asking, why is something arising? Why am I feeling a certain way? Why is something coming up externally? Because it's always almost perfectly mirroring some internal aspect of the experience. And so that's led me into bigger and bigger questions consistently about the nature of the universal hologram and what's happening in the collective consciousness. And I've also realized how much of my individual experience is mirrored in other people's experiences. And that's been a real mind bender and an eye opener to investigate, because the more that I lean into the nature of the subjective experience, the more it seems to connect to the fractal, which is everybody else's experience. And specifically moving into proportional aspects of the collective consciousness, like the divine feminine. Every single bearer of feminine energy, which is literally every single one of us, is experiencing a connection to that cosmic feminine source and the collective consciousness of everybody going through the motions of the feminine. Just like all of us are moved by the planets and the astronomical alignments and the celestial bodies, all of that energy is leading to the convergent point of what we're feeling as our personality goes through certain shifts, as the ego is forced to integrate, as we're meant to look into our shadow. So every time something's arising, I'm automatically asking myself, okay, how much of this is happening to me versus the entire collective mind? And what is this happening for? What are we being forced to awaken to and to see to the bottom of, to understand the truth of who we really are? So I'm seeing more and more, I feel through the eyes of oneness, and writing my book really brought me there. Over the last year, I've really gone through a very deep experience of birthing consciousness through me, which took me to really a new level of understanding myself, wisdom, really universal intelligence, because that leads to this almost impersonal experience of just being another vessel of consciousness. And then that also begs the question, isn't every single person also a vessel of awareness? And how do we all awaken our individual ability to be that, to see that we are fractals of source? And if we accept and honor that, we transmute the lower egoic function into just a vessel for higher intelligence, for love, for soulfulness to expand through us, and to be of service to the divine through every different facet and aspect of our lives. So a lot of different questions, they always connect to all the other questions. But I'd say that more and more I'm asking questions based on soulful inquiry that's coming up very naturally. So it's not like the mind is even introducing the question. It's more of like an active interaction with the questions that are arising in the field, which are automatically answered through everything that you pursue in alignment with that flow. So it's a very graceful dance and relationship with universal consciousness that I find really beautiful, really harmonious, and it's really a blessing to experience it every day.
Yeah, and I remember the first time we were here, we talked about the great split in the world and how it was looking like externally, how we were experiencing these layers of the 5D, the 3D reality. But in the book, you were talking about how people are very split between their conscious and their subconscious minds, and that this projection of our reality is nearly opposite to what we experience within. So now turning it more inward about this split that's going on and how that's reflecting outside first, what can you speak into with regards to that?
So some time ago, I made a video about changes are coming to really put into the spotlight that the entire collective consciousness is so split that at this point in time, it's just inevitable for there to be greater splits that actually allow for the healing to ensue. It's almost like a person that's been suppressing pain for decades of their life, which begins with an emotional root cause. Let's say it's suppressed anger or it's some degree of frustration within the self due to a lack of self love. And that can compound to the point that it's a chronic disease or it's a pattern that might lead to cancer many years down the line. So essentially, suppressing anything leads to a point where that split creates this schism that needs to be revealed through even deeper pain that arises before the suffering has an opportunity to be reconciled through the work of seeing what really caused that. So I feel like the entire collective consciousness is going through just that. There's so much wounding that planet Earth has gone through, and so much that we're seeing right now is it's not easily reconcilable. It needs for us to all take into account what has been suppressed within our own consciousness and within the entire collective mind. What are people choosing to not see? And so automatically everything is brought into the equation. I feel like from this standpoint of understanding, all the issues are in some way interwoven. It's just like the human body that can't detach the physical from the mental, from the emotional, and the supermental, the higher spiritual aspects of our field of awareness. So the same thing goes for planet Earth. If we're dealing with such wars, such divisiveness, such duality consciousness, pervasive in government level, politically, socially, economically, across every tier of the human experience, that's making us think about what else is being kept from us and what's really causing that duality, which is in part what human beings really like to harbor within themselves. And so the microcosmic reflection of that is that almost everybody is harboring a deep split between mind and heart, conscious and subconscious minds. And it's a very important thing to begin to analyze. Where are you split within yourself? Meaning, where are you holding these deep fragments in terms of different parts of you that you don't want to acknowledge, different pain points that you choose to distract yourself from and maybe escape into a reality of running away from your true self and the parts that really need to be identified and integrated. And instead of doing that, you choose to don a mask or enter this personified version of yourself that's trying to feel good instead of really understand who you are. And the entire planet Earth right now, the collective consciousness is bearing a very narcissistic mask. And the way it energetically feels to me is that narcissistic collapse is overdue. Just like the nature of an individual that bears a very split psyche, and that eventually realizes that the nature of that egoic mask, it can't be sustained for too long. Because although that conceited ego, it can lead to superficial gains, to success, materialism, you can find ways to achieve a lot of comfort in the 3D world and in the matrix. But at a certain point, you realize a lot is missing from that. You can't experience true love, true connection, true authenticity. You're always seeking for more validation, more approval. And you're constantly escaping from those inner pain points because what's impossible for a narcissist or a very egoically fragmented person to experience is contentment with their true self. So it all comes down to, at the end of the day, when you're with yourself, when you have to face your aloneness, or when we're confronted with really big splits in the collective, like what COVID did to all of us, when you're forced to be in your house alone, or when there's nowhere to go, or where, social norms are all of a sudden broken, what do you do then? And I feel these are the small tests that are really revealing when something bigger goes down, how are people going to respond to it? Are we going to be freaking out because there's no way for us to escape that brokenness that we've been experiencing internally? Or are we going to realize that this is really a time for those splits to be reconciled and to understand that all that is happening now is really an attempt for consciousness to come back into a state of unity? And that's really revealing the deeper split, because the way that people respond to that breaking down of the escape mechanism that's been so pervasive for millennia, really, like trying to hide from the darkness and trying to create this great wall between the conscious and the subconscious mind. At a certain point, that becomes something that can't be maintained any longer. And so that's the point where we really have the opportunity to understand, what have we been doing to create this great divide within ourselves? And oftentimes that feels like an ego death for people when they go through any kind of experience that makes them see they've been lying to themselves or other people, or they've been harboring inauthenticity, these different facades. They can really wake up to the reality that it doesn't need to be so difficult. And this is kind of the irony of this entire split, which seems like it's going to evoke so much suffering. But the reality is, if you're harboring an authentic energy, then nothing's going to change for you when the world splits in deeper ways. Because what's being torn away is the falsity, is the egocentrism, are the masks. If you don't want to keep any blindfolds on, you're just going to be looking clearly into the reality you've already been choosing to see. If you're seeing through the eyes of consciousness, then there's no mirror reflection that's even dirtied or tainted that needs to be shattered, because those are really the illusions that need to go. And so from a collective level, I really feel like we need to think about all the different aspects that have been suppressed from us. This includes lost knowledge, suppressed history, disclosure, really big one, because whatever we're not seeing about the nature of the multidimensional universe, about extraterrestrial life forms, about what the government's been hiding for so many years, which has started to come out. Like, a lot of people in the spiritual arena are interested in the gateway process and these sorts of very interesting disclosed documents regarding energy, the biofield, the holographic nature of the universe. The more we see these things aren't subjective renderings of what some people think. This is the truth that's been suppressed because collectively people haven't been ready to really see the truth and accept it. And so that's really the pressing question, I think. Are we ready to experience the truth? Because we need to integrate, but a lot of people don't want to. And so that comes back to the nature of the split between conscious and subconscious. That really comes down to how much truth are we afraid of integrating about ourselves? Because that's what keeps the conscious mind separate from the subconscious. If we're ready to understand really the reason why we're not healing, or the reason why we're not able to be our true selves, or the reason why we can't hold space for love and unity, which seem to be the desired experiences for everybody, but lo and behold, a lot of people are actually terrified of actually being in a loving frequency, because that requires total integration, total transparency, honesty, integrity. And these are really the most difficult values for human beings to embody, because it's a lot easier for the mind to just conceive of a standard that it wants to embody, and it's all about conformity, fitting in, just embodying the conformist mentality. But that's not really the way that this new earth energy is influencing us. If we're to move with the new energy, it's all about ripping off all the aspects of the self that have been falsified and starting to honor the deeply authentic essence that's really at the heart of our own beingness. And so that comes down to the heart, the language of the soul, the intuition, the higher self. And that's really what compels me to do the work that I do. I'm constantly receiving more information about what people need to synergize this awareness that we all are one when it comes to the perspective of consciousness. Because a really interesting thought is that our higher self at the highest dimensional level is source. We all share a connection with God. We all are that. But that's like, let's say, an 11th dimensional construct of awareness, which is completely unitive, totally integrative. And to get there, we need to drop everything that doesn't align with consciousness itself. So how many of us are really able to go there? That's the question. We all can. We all should be aspiring to get there, but we have to be willing to understand all of that inner darkness that doesn't comply with the highest standard of consciousness itself needs to be understood and integrated. And I feel that's why we're really here.
Wow. And
the deepest point of wisdom would be, you knew it all along. You created it to be this way. I think that alone would catapult people to a new level of seeing their reality. Because every single thing you might feel at odds with, you created for yourself. And to let that sink in is so cathartic, because it dissolves that resistance. It makes you realize that if your higher self already knew, you would have the power to get over it, to make the most of it. If you chose your family, you chose the circumstances, you chose the challenges and everything else, even the way that you physically and emotionally express right now, down to your DNA, then that's potential you're choosing. You're choosing that space of opportunity, like I spoke to earlier. You're choosing to learn that you have free will. You're choosing to realize that you had it all along. That's actually why you fell into this state of amnesia, to recover your power. That's the most beautiful part of the experience. That if you already are readying yourself to come back to the realization of who you were and who you always were meant to be, you're tapping into that higher self as that future you. And it makes it so much easier because that builds up that trust. And I really feel that's the missing ingredient for so many people. A lot of people tell me, how do I channel, or how do you channel? Because I can't possibly channel. How do I become connected to a higher self when I have no idea how to relate to that? That's the $1,000,000 question. And I can't emphasize that anymore because most people, they think there are select individuals that can do it and they cannot. And that's what needs to be shattered as an illusion. And that's part of what I feel has been creating the split in this world, that the way civilization has been set up is to separate people from their innate power and the power of their consciousness. Because if all would simultaneously wake up to the power of their awareness, their free will, their ability to change what they feel can't be changed, it would be the disruptive kind of nuclear bomb to set the collective free. Everyone would choose differently that isn't experiencing the bliss state of freedom and love and unity. And so at the same time, a lot of people aren't choosing that because they're afraid to, or they think that they aren't ready. So if we were to red pill ourselves into creating that opportunity, it comes down to that, to realizing that that's why you're here. And if you're suffering, you're literally just depriving yourself of the opportunity that you signed up for and created for yourself. So people are not ready to realize that until they later go through it. So typically, it's sometimes people even tell me, if you would have told me that a few years back, I would have no idea what you're talking about. I would reject it and I would hate you for even trying to project that onto me. But now it's like I'm a part of their soul telling them that this is real and that they knew it all along.
Wow.